Giyu versus Sanemi is probably the most talked about matchup in Demon Slayer for what seems like what's been forever, and will probably continue being talked about into the future until the sun finally goes out. Despite this matchup being talked about so frequently, the majority of people that you see agree that Sanemi wins, albeit with it being a high-stakes death match that is extremely close. And that's the root issue of this battle, and why it's discussed so much, despite the winner commonly being Sanemi. Most of the argumentation and debate around this battle is how close the gap between the two fighters actually is, with it commonly being argued that they're either relative and Sanemi slightly superior, or Sanemi is vastly superior. How big is the gap actually? Is it really miles apart? Are they really equals, or is the answer somewhere in the middle? Today I'm going to be looking at arguments for why they may or may not be equal, and explaining them and giving information about the arguments, with me adding context or clarifying things in certain instances. So in a sense, this video will be purely informative of the arguments for both sides. You should also be aware I'm not omniscient and I don't know every single argument for each character. However, I'm aware of a lot for both sides of the coin here, so I'm going to try to cover as much as I possibly can. We will be starting with all the arguments for the two parties being equal, then move on to arguments about Sanemi being above Giyu, since those are vastly more popular than arguments about Giyu being stronger than Sanemi, with the only real basis for these arguments being feats from Demon King Tanjiro, which just isn't really a good source of strength. If you want to know why, you can go watch my video on canon Demon King Tanjiro's strength level, but in short, he's just not powerful, simply because he never reached his full potential, and the only statement saying he was powerful was a mistranslation. Again, if you want more information, you can go watch my video on it, the link will be in the description. But other than that, we're going to be starting with arguments for why they are equal. And keep in mind, a lot of these arguments here rely on multiple pieces of each argument, and some of them build off one another, so keep that in mind when reviewing all of them. The most common argument for the Wind Pillar and Water Pillar being equal is their portrayal. Giyu and Sanemi are pretty consistently portrayed as being rivals with one another, with rivals in shonen fiction commonly being rivals in strength. This is shown through a variety of things, such as the Hashira meeting after the events of the Swordsmith Village arc, and Giyu excuses himself from the Hashira meeting, and Sanemi interprets this as him looking down on the group and appears to try to attack Giyu before Guillaume interrupts them. This extends further in the hashira training, where the two have a sparring match, showing their extremely different personalities and contrasting sword styles, Sanemi being the representation of offense and Giyu showcasing ultimate defense. This spar will be talked about a good bit more later, so don't worry. Continuing on, we also see their banter in the Muzan fight, with Sanemi scolding Giyu for losing focus, and them clashing their swords together to get the red blades, and a pretty iconic panel. This argument extends all the way to the end of the series, with them being the only two active Hashira alive after the events of the Sunrise Countdown. All this is to say they are consistently portrayed as polar opposites and constantly shown in related sequences, making this a foundational narrative argument. The next and probably most important argument for them being equals is their sparring match in the Hashira training. Sanemi's offense seemingly is cancelled out by Giyu's defense, and neither is able to land any damage on the other. This argument relies on the assumption that they are going full power on each other, and the fanbook statement that says the following about the spar. Quote, when the Wind Hashira, Shina Zugawa, trains with the Water Hashira, Tomioka, they're so evenly matched that their techniques break each other's wooden swords. This statement is taken as evidence that the spar was equal, and therefore both parties, Sanemi and Giyu, are relative from this interaction, with extra support being that Sanemi's offense can't overwhelm Giyu's defense. The final main argument for Giyu and Sanemi being equals is one that is dismissive of one of Sanemi's arguments, that being that Sanemi has better feats than Giyu, particularly against Kokoshibo and his relativity to Guillaume. This argument asserts that all of Sanemi's feats in this fight are unscalable, so he shouldn't outscale Giyu, who is a Akaza rival with his mark. For example, Sanemi fights Kokoshibo solo in base form, but Kokoshibo is blatantly holding back, as pretty much as soon as Kokoshibo says he's going to start trying, he blitzes Sanemi pretty easily. If Kokoshibo is going all out at this point, he's now being affected by the Marichi blood, which is shown to hinder his combat ability pretty greatly, and this sustains and persists as a debuff even when Kokoshibo is in his longsword form. The grounds for this argument builds up further by saying they perform similarly in the Muzan fight, with some saying Giyu even outperformed Sanemi. Giyu fought Muzan for a longer time and lasted longer than Sanemi. Giyu also reacts to Muzan's off-screen attack that takes out all of the hashira, as noted by Inosuke, with the only other hashira confirmed to react to this being Gyome, according to Inosuke, implying Gyome and Giyu are the cream of the crop when it comes to reaction speed. This is without mentioning they should have similar strength, or at least be in the same ballpark, as they clash their swords together to make the red blade. This would all mean that Sanemi doesn't have anything to outscale Giyu, and if anything, based on the Muzan fight and portrayal, Giyu might have the slight edge, but overall both parties have shown similar speed and power levels, and Sanemi doesn't have any feats to supplant these levels based on this argument. Moving on to the arguments about why Sanemi is above Giyu, the first being that portrayal is irrelevant and feats are what matter. That is the narrative portrayal that I'm referring to. Similar to how most people have feats overriding statements, feats would override any narrative that these two are rivals. Thus, the narrative is outright dismissed, or in another case, the narrative is viewed as different than rivalries in other shonen fiction. And in this case, the narrative for Giyu and Sanemi being rivals, therefore being equals or relative, is not a normal rivalry. Most relative fighters and rivalries are that way because of power levels. Think of Dragon Ball Super, Goku and Vegeta, Final Valley, Naruto and Sasuke, Gojo and Sukuna. These rivalries are defined by power. Giyu and Sanemi's rivalry is defined by their distaste for one another, rather than it being strictly driven by power. The second argument is that the sparring match simply doesn't matter. This is argued in two different ways, the first being that one or both parties are holding back in the sparring match, and the second being that Sanemi was dominating the spar if both parties are going full power here. You might be questioning why one or both parties would be holding back, and there's two possible answers to that question. One is that we've seen sparring matches in the series before, where one or both the parties were holding back. This being shown in Rengoku's Stories of Flame, where he's shown unable to hit Mitsuri, and she parries everything he throws at her. He does overwhelm her, but despite being her tutor and 9 ranks higher than her at this point, and Mitsuri doesn't have love breathing at this point either. Unless you think this Mitsuri can go band for band with this Rengoku is holding back. Another possibility is that Sanemi is just holding back. The reason for this is because he's been shown holding back every single time he fights his comrades, so it's in character for him to do so. We see him hold back against Tanjiro at the Hashira meeting, where Tanjiro can evade his strike and headbutt him before Sanemi can evade him, yet 1 second later, when the Master of the Mansion arrives, Tanjiro says he can't react to Sanemi and is shocked by his speed. We also see Sanemi holding back against Rengoku in Stories of Flame, because Rengoku is able to block his strikes without too much difficulty, and Rengoku is relative to Lower Moon 2 at this point, but Rengoku could just be really strong and near Hashira level at this point, so this one isn't really concrete. We also see Sanemi hold back against Genya, as Tanjiro outspeeds Sanemi's travel speed here, despite making his move after Sanemi launched at Genya. We know he's holding back here because moments later, he perception blitzes Tanjiro with his travel speed, while Tanjiro was completely on guard for him. So Sanemi holding back against his comrades, even people he hates like Tanjiro, isn't something that's inconsistent for his character. If they're holding back, none of this matters and the rest of this can be dismissed, but if you do think they're going full power, this argument asserts that Sanemi is dominating the majority of the spar. The opening of the spar indicates Sanemi's superiority to Giyu, causing Giyu's blade to chip, with Sanemi's blade taking no damage. The follow-up scene showcases Giyu can't keep his footing when Sanemi is attacking him, and is leaning back with one foot in the air. Sanemi acknowledges that Giyu is somewhat struggling by saying, "What's the matter? Aren't you different than us?" Giyu then initiates a form in which Sanemi evades in midair without any damage. It's a form that Giyu can use to track Sanemi throughout the air, and he still isn't able to hit him. The final sequence shows no relativity in speed or power, since Sanemi is at the apex of his jump before the final clash, and even if Sanemi activated a form, he has to wait for gravity to pull him down within Giyu's range, giving Giyu ample time to react. This being shown when we see their swords clash. Sanemi is still in midair, and thus couldn't attack Giyu until he was in range. Their power wouldn't be equal in this instance because they could be putting in more power than what's required to break the wooden swords. If it takes hypothetically 5 units of force to break the wooden sword, the clash created by both parties could have been 20 units of force, maybe 25 units of force, or something drastically higher, which would simply mean as long as they're above the force threshold to break the swords, we don't know the upper limits of their power, and thus the databook statement can be disregarded, as it only applies to the scene of them being evenly matched with their swords breaking, as it's the only scene in the fight where they are truly shown being equals with both their wooden swords being broken, and every other instance of the spar shows Sanemi winning, whether it be overwhelming Giyu and Giyu having to take a back foot, or at the beginning where Sanemi chips Giyu's wooden sword. And this argument is tied to the last argument I'm going to be talking about, which is Sanemi's feats that are portrayed to be higher than Giyu's. Sanemi's most important argument for being stronger than Giyu is his superior feats. Sanemi has relativity to Guillaume, who is stated to be the strongest hashira. It's stated in the fanbook that the stone and wind pillar spurred each other to new heights during the hashira training, and this obviously could only be done if both parties were in a similar caliber, and in addition to this, they perform combo attacks that are in perfect sync, while Sanemi is likely nerfed from his injuries. If Guillaume was so much faster and stronger than Sanemi, it wouldn't make sense for Sanemi to help, as he would just get in Guillaume's way, but we see Sanemi's involvement directly led to Guillaume actually hitting Kokushibo, as Kokushibo running alongside Sanemi is what allowed Guillaume to get in close and land a strike on Kokushibo. Sanemi is also shown reacting to Kokushibo ramping up his moon breathing, and this is a Kokushibo implied to be serious, and Kokushibo without moon breathing was able to perception blitz Akaza. In addition, none of Giyu's feats in the Muzan fight are quantifiable to make him superior to Sanemi. Firstly, Sanemi is able to weave a heavily focused attack from Muzan after he fought Kokushibo, took major damage, and passed out, but in his fight with Kokushibo, he was getting tagged by Longsword at incredible ranges, showing Muzan's drastic speed inferiority to Longsword Kokushibo. In addition, the instance with the tornadoes potentially outspeeding Sanemi is unscalable. The reason for this is because we don't know what these characters were doing when the tornadoes were created. One character could have been distracted, occupied by more tentacles, or anything under the sun. We also don't know how far away each character was from the tornadoes when they spawned. One tornado could have spawned 1 foot away, or it could have spawned 10 feet away from the other party. On top of that, these tornadoes could have different sizes, or one or more of these characters here could have had all their momentum stopped and thus was affected by the tornado's suction ability to a greater extent. With just these 2 freeze frame panels, it's impossible to scale this anywhere, as we're missing so much context that it's not even worth considering. To help you better understand the importance of these factors, if this tornado scene was to be taken seriously, then you could also take base form Obanai being just as fast as Mark Guillaume based on this panel. Obviously, I don't even need to debunk this isn't true, and the reason this scene is possible is because we don't know the context of what each character was doing before this panel happens. You can use this same logic to say that there's no relativity between the characters in this panel as well. Giyu has been attacking from off screen, as we see his water form is coming from off the panel, and we have no idea how far Guillaume and Sanemi had to travel to reach this point to intercept Muzan. This argument also gives a different interpretation of the red blade scene as well. The clashing of the blades in this argument is argued to be friction based, since Sanemi got a red blade by driving his sword into Guillaume's flail. Even if they are relative in strength, the speed feats would deem Sanemi far superior. The feat of Giyu and Gyomei reacting to Muzan, as stated by Inosuke, isn't relevant because the attack isn't fast and we have no idea what Sanemi was doing during this attack. Inosuke could perceive the attack, meaning it wasn't very fast, and just because Gyomei and Giyu protected him doesn't mean Sanemi didn't react and defend himself somewhere else. Inosuke's statement has nothing to do with Sanemi. We have no idea where he was in regards to this attack or if he was even close to protect Inosuke. With all of this context, Sanemi in conclusion would just have better feats. The final argument for Sanemi being above Giyu is Sanemi and Giyu and Tanjiro and how they all relate to Muichiro. This starts with Sanemi and his base form being a blitz tier above marked Muichiro, and marked Muichiro should be superior to marked Tanjiro since he was superior to Tanjiro before Hashira training in the Swordsmith Village arc, and is implied to have higher potential than Tanjiro and is also younger than Tanjiro, so he likely has more room to grow. Any arguments about base Sanemi not being a blitz tier faster than marked Muichiro and Muichiro lost because of inexperience are null and void because Sanemi has no idea how Muichiro lost his fight, and he's simply just forming an opinion on why he thinks Muichiro lost. We know he didn't see the fight because his reason for why he thinks Muichiro lost is wrong. Muichiro never had to deal with Kokushibo's moon-breathing fragments, as Kokushibo's sword blitzes and cuts off Muichiro's hand, not the moon crescents, and Kokushibo's base arm movements outpace Muichiro's regular forms. The reason this is important is marked Tanjiro is a lot closer to base form Giyu, and if marked Muichiro is relative to this Tanjiro, or just above him, since they went through the same Hashira training, and Muichiro was already stronger, younger, and had more potential, and Sanemi's a blitz tier above him, it gives consistency to Sanemi being a level above Giyu. That's every major relevant argument for them being equals or for Sanemi being superior. The arguments for them being equals leans a lot more into narrative and portrayal, so if you lean into those factors to scale, then you'll probably heavily favor that side. If you're someone that drastically favors feats over narrative, then you're more than likely going to agree with the Sanemi side, as it leans a lot more into his feats being superior to Giyu's higher end showings. Let me know what you think though. Do you think these two are equals? Do you think Sanemi is stronger? Or perhaps do you think maybe even Giyu is stronger? Thank you for watching, and if you want to see me do more content like this where I simply just look at two opposing sides of a coin, let me know and I might do some more videos in the future like this. Other than that, have a nice rest of your day.